Everyone's freaking out about the oil at the Strait of Hormuz, but the real crisis right now is food. 33% of the world's fertilizer that's shipped by sea is now stuck behind this blockade, and the timing could not be worse because planting season in the northern hemisphere starts in like a month. And fertilizer is literally what makes crops grow, so when a huge chunk of the market is taken out, that makes the rest of the prices spike, and that means more expensive food by the time harvest season hits in the fall. And all of this is happening after Trump's trade war already threw farmers into chaos. Like China, who used to be the biggest buyer of US soybeans, cut purchases from $12 billion down to almost zero, which forced a massive federal bailout. And even after that, farm bankruptcies jumped 46% last year, and US farm debt was already projected to hit $624 billion this year before this war. So yeah, oil matters, gas prices matter, but as Jezebel points out, nothing matters more than literal sustenance. If this conflict drags on, that's what could really be at risk. News girls, along with Jezebel and their partners at Splinter, will be tracking the ramifications of the war in Iran, so be sure to follow.
Of the fertilizers is shipped through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, that is also at risk. And it matters particularly in the southern hemisphere, where the planting and therefore the fertilizers is badly needed now. Because if the price of food increases significantly, it is not going to just be the price of food, it is going to be inflation expectations. Because we know that people are particularly attentive to two things: the price of food, processed and unprocessed, and the price of gas at the petrol station. So if the disruption persists long enough, the adjustment shifts from prices, which we are putting up with now, to possibly rationing, with very different economic consequences.
If the worst comes to the worst, we will have a global famine, where some countries, quite possibly including Australia, will be unable to produce enough food for their populations.
How vulnerable is Australia compared to the rest of the world?
There are two major issues for Australian food production coming out of this crisis. One is fertiliser may not be available in time for the growing season, and we are massively dependent upon fertiliser produced from fossil fuels to be able to create farm output in the very first instance. The second is that because Australia doesn't have anything resembling a decent rail network, transportation from the farm to the city is all by diesel trucks. Now, if the diesel isn't available, the trucks can't move and neither can the food. So this is something which should be taken extremely seriously.
So for your typical mum and dad at home, what do you expect they'll start experiencing?
The biggest scare is that, suddenly people who've expected to find food on the supermarket shelves are going to find it's not there.
The federal government says at the moment our fuel supplies are static. We have 39 days worth of petrol, 30 days of jet fuel and 29 days worth of diesel, with locked-in contracts for more fuel to be arriving into late May. Beyond that, more deals need to be
Why are
done.
fertilizers more important than oil right now? It's because many aren't getting through the Strait of Hormuz, putting global food security at risk. That's because together Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE and Bahrain ship out more than 1/3 of global urea and nearly 1/4 of ammonia, key fertilizer ingredients that contribute to the growth of roughly half of the world's food. Iran alone produces 10% of the global urea supply. Experts warn of a fertilizer shock. Timing couldn't be worse. The blockage comes at a critical time for farmers across the northern hemisphere who are preparing to sow crops in spring, the moment they need fertilizer most. In the US, tariffs have already pushed food prices higher. India is even more exposed because it buys around 40% of its urea and phosphate fertilizers from the Middle East. Now the world will look for other suppliers. The most obvious alternative is China. But China tightened fertilizer exports last year to protect its own farmers, leaving the world with fewer options. And China too can't produce as much fertilizer as it typically does, because much of the sulfur it needs to make fertilizer comes from countries west of the Strait of Hormuz. Markets are already signaling stress of a future fertilizer shock. Benchmark urea prices in Egypt jumped from $485 to $665 per ton in a single week, a 37% spike. The impact is clear. When fertilizer becomes this expensive, many farmers simply buy less. Less fertilizer means smaller harvests, and smaller harvests mean higher food prices.
Shalom, back again with another lesson. Before I begin this lesson, I'd like to begin by giving all honor, glory and praise unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Recha Kodash. I want to give double honors to my elders and apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone, where I've learned this truth from. want to say peace and salutations to you, Akim, you brothers out there laboring, pushing this word out in all truth and in sincerity, presenting your bodies as a living sacrifice, which is a reasonable service. I want to say shalom to you, Akwaf, meaning you Israelite sisters out there that may be listening. And I also want to say shalom to you Israelites that are scattered across the four corners of the earth. You may look like these other nations, but your seed line goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is the chosen seed line. Shalom. So at the start of this lesson, I played some clips, which is the main talking point that's on everybody's mind currently at the moment. And that's the fact that the famines are getting ready to take place in the earth, right? So starting with the head apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone, and they taught that to the like-minded brothers that are out here on the highways and hedges teaching. Now we're starting to talk about more about the famines, the coming famines, because obviously you can see it as clear as day that it's getting ready to take place in the earth. So this is just going to be a brief lesson. I'm always going to start in the scripture that I always go to, which is in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, because it touches, or it taps the nail on the head perfectly when it talks about this, famines being in the land, right? So this is the book of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 6. It says, "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." So as it mentions there, like wars and rumors of wars, we're seeing these all over the world, It says, but the end is not yet. So this isn't the end. This is just the beginning of all the trouble that's getting ready to take place in the earth. But it's a positive sign knowing that we're that much closer to the end of this wicked kingdom, and our king coming back to reign on the earth in righteousness, right? So as we continue on in verse 7, it says, "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." And that's what we're witnessing, the Iranians versus the Americans and the Israelis, right? So it says, "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places." Now the famines is what we're starting to witness, right? We're starting to see that there's no fertilizer coming through the Strait of Hormuz. There's no diesel or petrol coming through the Strait of Hormuz. They talked about a ceasefire, and that ceasefire has basically crumbled and gone to nothing. They're getting ready to start fighting again if Iran hasn't already decided to strike first, right? But they're already seeing this. You got pestilences. People are going to start getting ill. People are going to start getting sick. There's more diseases that are spreading throughout the earth these days that are making a comeback, right? And then you have earthquakes. There was an earthquake maybe a couple of days ago in Japan, just off the coast of Japan. Now, keep in mind, Japan is already known for having a lot of seismic activity. So diverse places is not necessarily a big shock to a lot of people when you hear about earthquakes in Japan. However, the earthquakes over the last, I'd say, century have been increasingly more and more, as time goes on. The earthquakes seem to happen quite often, so a lot of people are starting to understand that, well, there's a lot of earthquakes happening in the earth now, right? But it says, as we continue reading, it says, "All these are the beginning of sorrows," right? So this is just the beginning that we're witnessing, right? As I mentioned. Now, when we go to the book of 2nd Esdras, we're reading the book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 16. I believe it's 17 is where I want to... Yeah. Right, so this is Esdras. He's saying, because Esdras has already witnessed the destruction, right? He's witnessing the destruction. And he says, "Woe is me. Woe is me." Like, meaning destruction is me, right? This is 2nd Esdras 16 and 17. "Woe is me, woe is me. Who will deliver me in those days?" Because he's seeing everything that's taking place in the earth. And he's wondering, what's going to happen to me in those days? Because Esdras understood about reincarnation, regeneration, right? Coming back on the earth in the third or fourth generation. He understood that, right? So Esdras understood that he'll be here in those times. So as we continue reading, it says, "The beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death." Because around these times that we're getting ready to witness, there's going to be a lot of people that perish of famine. When that food security shock comes and people start panicking, like panic buying, just like how they did during the pandemic, where they had toilet paper and people were going crazy over the last bit of toilet paper. Now multiply that by food, people not having food. You wonder how crazy people are going to get when there's no food, on the shelves. And that's getting ready to happen. And even if there is food on the shelves, the inflation is going to be so high, people are just going to resort to taking it. Who's going to stop them? You know what I mean? Who's going to stop them? The people at the store, they're not getting paid enough to put their life at risk for a carton of eggs. You know what I mean? So it says the beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death. A lot of people are going to be taken out. It says the beginning of wars, and the powers shall stand in fear, because obviously it's going to be war everywhere. It's going to be world war. So a lot of people are going to be scared of those times, right? It says the beginning of evils. What shall I do when these evils shall come? Right? These evils are not here as yet, but they're on the threshold. They're getting ready to take place. That's why we're now hearing these stories about food security, food shortages. All these things are starting to make a comeback in the mainstream media. People are starting to talk about these things now, right? So as we continue, it says, behold, famine and plague, tribulation and anguish are sent for scourges for amendment, meaning they're sent here to correct us, because obviously we've been going off, we're a wicked society, been going off as a people, constantly going up against the Lord, being blasphemous against the Lord. And, the Lord's getting ready to send a judgment because of that, right? So I'm going to jump that. Actually, let me just keep reading. So verse 20, it says, but for all these things, they shall not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of the scourges. Meaning, like, people, even though they can see that these things are coming, getting ready to take place on the earth, they continue to in their wickedness. They choose not to make any corrections or anything like that. The only people that made the corrections are the elect. Everybody else is just set and got their mind set on continuously being wicked. That's what they've done. That's what they do. Now, as we continue reading, it says, behold, victuals shall be so good cheap on earth, that they shall think themselves to be in good case. And even then shall evils grow on upon earth, sword, famine, and great confusion. Now you understand that this is what's getting ready to take place in the world today. Like, this is what's getting ready to take place. We understand now that's what's getting ready to take place because we can see it. It's starting to speak loud and clear now, right? It says, for many of them that dwell upon earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy, right? So people think they're going to stock up all this food, prepare all this food and all this other stuff. The Lord's going to get you, right? The Lord's going to get you, and you're going to fall into that judgment that the Lord's got prepared for this land, right? Now, as I continue reading, it says, verse 23, it says, and the dead shall be cast out as dung, and there shall be no man to comfort them. For the earth shall be wasted, and the cities shall be cast down. Like, the Lord's getting ready to turn this thing up, man. This thing's getting ready to be turned up to a whole nother level. It's going to be something like you've never witnessed before. None of us have ever witnessed before. It's going to be a nightmare, It says, there shall be no man left to till the earth and to sow it. So there won't be any people farming. There's going to be no food anywhere. The farming industry is getting ready to meet a catastrophic collapse, right? It says, the trees shall give fruit, and who will gather them? So obviously the natural trees will give their berries, and they'll grow apples and all this other stuff, but there won't be anybody to collect that fruit and to bring it to the supermarkets or anything like that. So they're just going to have wild fruit. So you'll have fruit around, but obviously like your normal grocery shops where you go and buy your shopping, that's getting ready to come to a close because it's going to be destroyed. Everything's going to be in utter chaos. Because when there's no food on the shelves and the shelves start getting empty, they're going to start rioting. people are going to start crashing out. It says, the grapes shall ripen, and who shall tread them? For all places shall be desolate of men. That war is going to be something fierce. That's what we're getting ready to experience and come into, right? It says, so that one man shall desire to see another, and to see his voice, or to hear his voice. For of a city there shall be 10 left, and of the field which shall hide themselves in the thick groves and in the clefts of the rock. So, you're not going to be walking around out in the open like you normally would, because you're going to have people out there hunting for you, looking for you. What you got, you look like you look like you got a little bit of meat on your bones. What you got in your bag, what can I take from you? You know what I mean? You ain't going to be out in the open like you normally are. You're going to be hiding in the bushes. You're going to be sneaking, right? And hiding in the rocks, right? So, I just wanted to sort of touch on that at the moment, because obviously we can see that it's getting to that point now where you're seeing a lot of people starting to talk about these famines. And this is just the beginning, as it mentioned in the scripture. This is just the beginning of sorrows. It's going to get worse. It's going to escalate. It's going to turn into, that climactic war that eventually will result in the nuclear weapons being deployed, right? So I pray that this lesson has been edifying through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahashim Yahushai. And I'm going to close out by giving all honor, glory, and praises unto Yahweh Bahashem, Yahushai Bahashem, Rechakudash. Double honors to my elders and apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone, that taught me this truth. I want to say peace and salutations to you hopeful elects that may be listening. It's on to the next one. Lord willing, Shalom.